I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my driveway that morning. Not because of anything dramatic. No broken windows, no smashed mailbox, no spray paint. It was something quieter. Something so small you'd only notice it if you lived in a place long enough to sense when the air feels off. My house numbers didn't look right. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the more I stared, the more the unease settled in. The metal digits on the front of my home, numbers I'd never once paid attention to, looked newer, shinier, crooked even, and not the numbers I'd had up there for years. It was like someone had tried to disguise my house as another property altogether. I stepped closer, and that's when questions began piling up faster than I could answer them. Why would anyone change my address? Why at night? Why without leaving a notice? And then, like a bad punchline, a letter from the HOA sat taped to my door. A violation. For the wrong house number. A house number they had installed. That was the moment something clicked. Something dark. Something deliberate. This wasn't an accident. Someone wanted my property misidentified. Someone wanted confusion. Someone wanted leverage. And deep down, I already suspected who it was. But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, was that this quiet little mix-up wasn't just petty HOA nonsense. It wasn't just harassment. It wasn't even just intimidation. What they did was a crime. A real one. A federal one. And by the time the police got involved, the HOA president, the same Karen who'd been targeting me for months, wasn't just facing angry neighbors. She was facing handcuffs. So how did a simple house number nearly destroy an entire HOA? Let me take you back to where it all began. If you ask most people, they'll tell you they never think about their house numbers. They're just there. A fixture you stop noticing after the first week of moving in. A piece of metal or plastic that sits quietly on the wall, doing nothing more than confirming you live where you think you live. That used to be true for me, too. I'd lived in Pine Ridge Estates for nearly 8 years, long enough to memorize every driveway crack, every creaky porch step, every streetlight that flickered at exactly 10:04 p.m. every night. It was a quiet, predictable neighborhood, tucked between rolling hills and patches of old oak trees that gave the community a peaceful, almost old-town charm. My house was a modest single-story with a wraparound porch and the kind of warm beige siding that faded into gold during sunset. I moved there after my job with the city ended. Long story, full of bureaucracy and burnout politics. But the quiet life suited me fine. I liked long evenings on the porch. I liked minding my own business. I liked the kind of solitude that came from routine. And I liked knowing that no matter how chaotic the world became, home would always feel predictable. That predictability started to fade when Marilyn Chapman became the president of the HOA. You know the type. The kind of woman who believes rules are holy text, and she's the chosen prophet. Perfectly straightened ash blonde bob, pastel cardigans, oversized sunglasses, even on cloudy days, clipboard glued to her hand like a security blanket. She wasn't the first HOA president we'd had, but she was the first one who treated the role like a full-time command position. Before Marilyn, the HOA was a loose group of retirees who organized seasonal potlucks and occasionally complained about overgrown shrubs. After Marilyn, it became something else entirely. Forms, inspections, mandatory newsletters, courtesy citations, threatening letters typed in bold fonts, weekly community walkthroughs, where she roamed the streets with 2 volunteers who nodded at everything she said like bobbleheads. At first, I ignored her. Everyone did. She was overbearing but harmless. A mosquito buzzing in your ear rather than a true threat. She fined someone for having mismatched patio furniture. She cited a family for leaving a bike in the front yard. She even tried to ban wind chimes because they disrupted the sound harmony of the neighborhood. People rolled their eyes, paid the occasional fine, and moved on. But over time, Marilyn became obsessed. Obsessed with order. Obsessed with compliance. Obsessed with control. And, unfortunately for me, obsessed with my property. It started small. A citation for my garbage cans being visible from the street, even though they were behind a wooden privacy screen. A warning about the decorative items on my porch. 2 lanterns that had been there since I moved in. Then an email claiming my mailbox paint was fading inconsistently, despite looking exactly the same as half the street. At first, it felt laughable. Then it became irritating. Then it became harassment. I tried to resolve it with her directly, but that was my first mistake. Talking to Marilyn was like trying to negotiate with a brick wall, one that took notes and threatened fines for scuffing its surface. One day I saw her standing on my lawn with her tape measure, scribbling something on her clipboard. I stepped outside, hands tucked in my pockets, and calmly asked what she was doing. She didn't even look up. "Ensuring compliance," she said. Compliance with what? She never answered. She just walked away, leaving small number flags stuck in the ground like I was a construction site, waiting for demolition. I began feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Unease. Not fear, not anger. Unease. The sense that someone was slowly setting up pieces for a game I hadn't agreed to play. Things got worse when the HOA announced mandatory home standardization updates, a fancy way of saying everyone must repaint their trim or face fines. My trim was fine, pristine actually, but Marilyn insisted I needed to refresh the color to match the new aesthetic direction of the community. I ignored it, and that was when she started crossing the line. One morning, I found a notice taped to my door. "Your address numbers must meet modern HOA visibility guidelines. Replace with approved style immediately." I stared at the paper, confused. My house numbers were perfectly visible, metal, brushed silver, large enough to read from across the street. I emailed the board requesting clarification. They didn't respond. I shrugged it off, figuring this was just another attempt to exert control. If only that had been where it stopped. The real trouble began 3 weeks later, when I noticed the first accident. I had ordered a small package online, nothing important, and it never arrived. The tracking said delivered, but it was nowhere. Amazon refunded me. I chalked it up to a driver mistake. Then my electric bill came late. Then a friend said her birthday card to me was returned undeliverable. Then the pizza delivery guy called, saying he couldn't find number 1847 anywhere, only 1849. I stood on my porch, phone in my ear, staring at the metal digits screwed into my siding. 1 to 8, 4 to 9. My address had always been 1847. 3 days earlier, it still had been. My stomach tightened. Someone had changed my house number. Not removed it, not vandalized it. Changed it carefully, surgically, deliberately. They'd replaced a 7 with a 9, using a similar metal finish, so at a glance it looked normal. But any mail carrier or delivery person would assume I was 1849, a house that didn't exist on my side of the street. Confused, I walked around the neighborhood, checking other homes. Not one had new numbers. Not one had been altered. Not one was missing digits. Just me. I reported it to the HOA. The next morning, I woke up to a fresh notice taped to my door. Violation for inaccurate or misleading house numbering. I read it twice. 3 times. 4. They fined me for the wrong number. The number they installed. When I confronted Marilyn outside the community mailbox station, she smiled with a tight, smug confidence and said, "All house numbers must be accurate. It's your responsibility to maintain them." There was something in her tone, something cold, that sent a chill down my spine. She knew what she'd done. She wanted me to know she knew. She wanted to watch me squirm. I didn't argue. I just stared at her. She stared back with the kind of smile predators wear when they think you're already caught. That night, I checked my security footage for the first time in months. I didn't expect to find anything. But around 3:17 a.m. 3 nights earlier, a figure appeared on my porch. A woman, short, blonde bob, pastel sweater, clipboard in hand. Marilyn Chapman. There she was, unscrewing my house numbers with gloved hands and replacing them one by one, checking a paper on her clipboard for reference. Carefully, calmly, like she was doing God's work. I stared at the footage, stunned. It wasn't petty harassment anymore. It wasn't intimidation. It wasn't an HOA citation. It was tamper with a legal identifier tied to mail, emergency services, property taxes, and federal records. This wasn't just wrong. It was a crime, a real one, but Marilyn had no idea yet, none, that her attempt to fix her problem homeowner wasn't going to just blow up in her face. It was going to bring law enforcement straight into her perfect little kingdom. And for the first time since she started targeting me, I felt something shift inside. Not fear, not anger, something colder, something resolute. If she wanted a battle, she was about to get one. The moment I watched the footage of Marilyn unscrewing my house numbers at 3:17 a.m., a cold understanding settled over me like a fog. This wasn't just a petty HOA president marking territory. This was strategic, dangerous, a calculated move carried out under darkness because she knew what she was doing wasn't just wrong, it was illegal. And people who commit crimes in the dark don't stop after one quiet offense. They escalate. I spent the rest of that night wide awake, sitting in my living room with the security footage paused on the frame where Marilyn turned her head slightly toward the street. The glow from the porch light brushed her face just enough to reveal her expression, calm, focused, almost pleased with herself. Not the face of someone who believed they were doing anything wrong. The face of someone who believed the rules didn't apply to them. The next morning, I decided to test something I'd been suspecting. I stood at the end of my driveway and watched the mail truck turn onto my road. The driver slowed as usual, scanning house numbers, and when he reached my mailbox, he stopped, but not in front of my home. He stopped in front of the house 2 doors down. He checked the mail, hesitated, then looked at the numbers again. I raised my hand and waved him over. "You looking for 1847? I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, I got something for that address, but..." He pointed at my house. "You got 1849. "I know," I said slowly. "Someone changed it." He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. That's not something we just ignore. Address tampering? That's a crime," I finished. He exhaled sharply. "Yeah, it is." I asked him a few questions. When the confusion started, what mail had been rerouted, whether anyone else had reported issues. He confirmed that for at least 2 weeks, packages in my home had been marked unable to deliver. Some were returned to sender. Others were sitting at the local post office waiting for clarification. This wasn't just harassment anymore. It was interfering with federal mail. Mail addressed me, a property owner, a legal resident, had been obstructed by someone changing my address number. The more he talked, the more something heavy pressed against my chest. And not fear, fury. Controlled, cold fury. I thanked him, and he left, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe what he'd seen. That same afternoon, I noticed something new on my front lawn. Another flag, bright red, numbered 14. 14 flags dotted along my walkway, flower beds, and porch steps, placed by the HOA during one of their compliance sweeps. I hadn't authorized any inspection. They hadn't notified me. They had simply walked on my property and begun marking areas they claimed violated community guidelines. I plucked one from the ground and read the tiny printed text beneath the number. Visibility concern. Visibility concern? Of what? My lawn was immaculate, my walkway clean, my plants neatly pruned. It didn't take long to realize what they were doing. If your house number is wrong, and the HOA documents multiple concerns, and no homeowner response to notices is logged, then the HOA can escalate. Escalation meant fines. Fines meant hearings. Hearings meant leverage. Leverage meant power. Marilyn wasn't just harassing me. She was building a case. A false one. I walked back inside and grabbed the last week's stack of letters, all violation notices. Every single one included the wrong house number. One fine was even addressed to 1849, occupant, as though I suddenly lived at a property number the HOA invented. It was a paper trail of fraud, and they were creating it intentionally. But the strangest moment came later that evening. I was in the kitchen cleaning dishes when something metallic clattered against my front porch. I walked over and opened the door, expecting maybe a package that had been misdelivered again. Instead, I saw a new set of house numbers, wrapped in bubble wrap, sitting neatly on the welcome mat. A sticky note on top read, "These match the new HOA standard. Install A as a P to avoid further penalties." No signature, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Marilyn's crooked curls, slanted from years of writing on clipboards. She had delivered new numbers, the wrong numbers, and instructed me to put them up to avoid violations she issued for numbers she herself altered in the night. It was so absurd it would have been laughable if it wasn't so sinister. The next day, I started correcting things, not physically on my home, but behind the scenes. I downloaded and saved every notice, letter, and email they sent. I pulled timestamps from my security footage. I began logging every delivery error. I took photos from multiple angles showing the incorrect numbers. I wasn't preparing for a conversation. I was preparing for a case. But I didn't confront Marilyn yet. Not directly. Not until I knew just how far she was willing to take this. Turns out, she wasn't done escalating. 2 days later, just before dawn, I heard the sound of footsteps outside. Soft, careful, but not careful enough. I grabbed my phone, quietly opened the front door, and saw a man in a reflective HOA vest crouching near my driveway, hammering a wooden stake into the ground. Attached to the stake was a laminated notice. Pending address correction requirement, violation number 7. My blood pressure rose as I stepped outside. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked. The man flinched and turned. He was younger than most of the HOA volunteers, maybe mid-30s, but he wore the same expression I'd seen many times before, the nervous defensiveness of someone following orders they didn't fully understand. "Oh, I'm just posting the notice," he said quickly. "The board instructed us to—" "Which board member?" He hesitated. "The president." Marilyn. His silence answered for him. He opened his mouth as if to apologize, but I stopped him. "You realize changing house numbers without authorization is illegal, right?" He blinked, startled. She said it was a simple correction. Correction? Or tampering? He swallowed, suddenly uneasy, and stepped back. I'm just doing what I was told." I didn't blame him. She manipulated everyone around her the same way, with full authority and fabricated rules. But this wasn't incompetence. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't even overreach anymore. It was a pattern. A deliberate strategy to create chaos around my address until I couldn't prove who was responsible. She wanted plausible deniability. She wanted control. She wanted obedience. And when she didn't get it from me, she wanted consequences. The final push came later that week, when I received a letter, this one in a manila envelope, with a printed header I'd never seen used before. Community Compliance Panel. Notice of formal review. Inside, a typed sheet claimed my property had unresolved critical violations, including misleading address display, non-responsive corrective action notices, and failure to install approved property identifiers. It even claimed emergency vehicles may not be able to locate my home in an emergency, putting the community at risk. This part made something inside me go still. Marilyn had crossed into dangerous territory. By changing my house number, she had created the very problem she was now citing as justification for further action. If emergency services were misdirected, if a fire truck went to the wrong home, if police couldn't identify the correct address, it wouldn't be a minor inconvenience. It would be a life-threatening hazard, and she had done it knowingly. This wasn't just harassment. It wasn't just tampering. It was willful endangerment. At that point, I realized I couldn't handle this quietly anymore. Not with meetings, not with appeals, not with polite conversations. This needed someone above her head, someone who understood the legal consequences of what she had orchestrated. So I called the county, not the HOA, not the police. The county property compliance office. The moment I explained what happened, the woman on the other end went silent. "You're telling me someone altered your legal address without authorization?" "Yes." "And the HOA issued fines based on an incorrect number they installed?" "Yes." And deliveries, utilities, and mail had been misdirected? Yes. She exhaled slowly. That's serious, she said. Very serious. You'll need to file a formal report. And you should also consider reporting this to federal postal authorities. Federal. The word hung in the air. Because once mail was involved, this was no longer a civil dispute. No longer an HOA issue. No longer a neighborhood spat. It had become federal jurisdiction. But the most concerning moment came next when she said, if someone intentionally obstructed your mail or caused misdelivery by altering your address, that's a federal offense. And if you have video proof, then you need to bring this forward. I did. I had crystal clear night footage. Time-stamped. Undeniable. Before I filled out the forms, I checked the cameras again, reviewing the last 2 weeks in case I missed anything. I did. 3 nights after Marilyn switched my numbers, someone else came by. Not her. Not the young volunteer from the morning. A second board member. A man with graying hair and a stiff walk who often accompanied Marilyn during inspections. I watched him crouch to inspect the numbers she installed. He tapped them, measured them with a tiny ruler, and took photos. He didn't remove them. He didn't correct them. He documented them. Documented the crime. It was clear now. This wasn't a one-woman operation. This was collective collusion. They were building evidence. Evidence against me, using a situation they themselves created. By the time I sat down to file the formal county report, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was focused, methodical, predictable, the opposite of what Marilyn expected. She thought I'd panic. She thought I'd fold. She thought I'd replace the numbers with whatever she dictated, validating her false violation trail. But instead, she had just handed me a case strong enough to collapse her entire presidency, and possibly get her arrested. The next morning, I filed everything. The county report, a federal postal tampering complaint, a statement with attached security footage, screenshots of every HOA notice, photos documenting the altered numbers, a timeline of misdelivered mail. Then I waited. 2 days passed without a word. But on the 3rd day, everything changed. A dark SUV pulled onto my street. Then a second. Men in plain clothing stepped out. Not police uniforms, not HOA volunteers. County investigators. And they were walking straight toward Marilyn's house. The 2 unmarked SUVs rolled to a silent stop in front of Marilyn Chapman's pristine, cream-colored 2-story home. Her hydrangeas swayed gently in the breeze, unaware that the calm of Pine Ridge Estates was about to split open like a fault line. I watched from my porch, arms crossed, expression steady. Not smug, not triumphant, just alert, focused, ready. The investigators, 2 men and 1 woman, stepped out, dressed in the neat, quiet attire of professionals who didn't need uniforms to convey authority. They walked with purpose, their eyes scanning door frames, light fixtures, security cameras, and sightlines like they'd done this 1,000 times before. One of them held a file thick enough that I immediately recognized it. My report, my evidence, my screenshots, my timeline. The weight of everything I'd built was now in the hands of people who knew exactly what they were looking at. They didn't hesitate. They didn't knock nervously. They didn't announce themselves. They knocked with the confidence of officials delivering consequences. 3 sharp raps. A pause. Then Marilyn opened the door. Even from across the street, I could read her expression, confusion, surprise, annoyance of being interrupted during what was probably her meticulously scheduled morning routine. The lead investigator held up his badge. The sunlight flashed off the metal. Her lips parted. He spoke, though I couldn't hear him. But I didn't need to. His tone was unmistakable, formal, direct, unemotional. The posture of someone informing a person that the situation was no longer under their control. Marilyn's shoulders stiffened. She crossed her arms, leaning against the doorframe like she could physically block their authority with body language alone. She shook her head, her mouth moving quickly. Protests, excuses, deflection. But the investigators didn't budge. Then one of them reached into the file, and pulled out a screenshot. My screenshot. The image of Marilyn at 3:17 a.m., crouching at my porch, unscrewing house numbers with her gloved hands. The investigator showed it to her. Her reaction was instant. Her fake confidence collapsed. Her face drained of color. Her arms uncrossed. Her mouth opened, then closed again without sound. Her eyes darted around as if looking for an escape route. But there wasn't one. The female investigator spoke next, calm but stern. Marilyn lifted her hands slightly, palms outward, a physical gesture of retreat. Then, in a motion that was almost pitiful, she stepped back and let them inside. 2 neighbors had come out of their homes by now, drawn by the presence of government vehicles and expressions that silently shouted, "Something serious is happening." I stayed where I was, watching, waiting. The interview lasted nearly 40 minutes. Enough time for more neighbors to notice. Enough time for whispers to travel from porch to porch, text message to text message, lawn to lawn. By the time the investigators emerged, half a dozen residents stood nearby pretending to check mailboxes or rake non-existent leaves. But the investigators didn't stop at Marilyn's house. They crossed the street, headed to home of the second board member, the stiff, graying man I'd seen documenting the wrong numbers on my wall. He opened his door nervously, and the same badges flashed in the sunlight. He stepped aside reluctantly. Another 40 minutes passed. More neighbors trickled outside. People recognized the SUVs. People recognized plainclothes officials. And people recognized the unmistakable gravity of official business. When the investigators finally approached my house, the entire neighborhood seemed to be watching. The lead agent approached my porch with professional but noticeably respectful tone. "Mr. Lawson?" I nodded. "That's me. We've reviewed your report and the evidence you sent in. Thank you for documenting everything as thoroughly as you did." "Glad it helped," I said simply. "It did." The female investigator stepped forward with a clipboard. "We'll be requesting the full security footage directly from your system for chain of custody purposes." "No problem," I said, already unlocking my phone for access. Then the lead investigator added something that made Marilyn's fate crystal clear. Address tampering is not something we take lightly, especially when it leads to misrouted mail and emergency misidentifications. I nodded. He continued, his tone firm. "And when it involves someone in a position of community authority, we take it even more seriously." He thanked me again, exchanged contact information, and returned to the SUV. The investigators pulled away from my property, but they didn't leave the neighborhood. They parked at the HOA clubhouse, the same building where Marilyn held her weekly meetings, the same place where she'd signed citations with arrogant precision, the same office whose walls were covered in so-called community bylaws she interpreted however she pleased. When they walked inside, the entire neighborhood held its breath. They stayed there for hours, talking to board members, reviewing documents, inspecting digital records, pulling printouts from filing cabinets. The clubhouse blinds remained open, and more neighbors drifted past gawk. Most pretended they weren't watching, but everyone knew something serious was unraveling. By the time the investigators finally left, the sun had dipped low, casting a long shadow across the perfectly manicured grass of Pine Ridge Estates. But the real unraveling was only beginning. The next morning, a special meeting was called, one that spread to the community chat like wildfire. Mandatory HOA assembly tonight. Attendance strongly encouraged. People showed up in droves. The clubhouse filled quickly. Folding chairs pulled out, people standing in the back, residents murmuring, exchanging updates. I sat near the side wall, calm, observing. I didn't want the spotlight. I didn't need credit. I wanted the truth exposed. The room went silent when Marilyn walked in. Gone was her pastel cardigan. Gone was the clip-on name badge that screamed president. Gone was her proud posture. She walked slowly, carefully, like a person walking across ice they knew was cracking under their feet. Even her hair, usually straightened into a crisp, sharp bob, looked slightly wilted. Behind her walked the same stiff board member who'd measure my numbers. His expression was equally grim. The remaining board members followed, avoiding eye contact with the crowd. Someone whispered loudly, "This is it." Someone else muttered, "About time." Then a resident on the far right side of the room said what everyone was thinking. They're here to explain themselves. Marilyn cleared her throat. "Good evening, everyone." Her voice shook. This was a woman who once strutted down the street with a clipboard like it was a scepter. Now she looked like someone facing Judgment Day. She unfolded a paper in her hand, a statement she had clearly rehearsed. But before she could start, a resident stood up. "Is it true you altered someone's address?" Silence. Marilyn blinked. She paused. "It was a misunderstanding." The crowd erupted. "Misunderstanding? You changed house numbers. You put mail carriers at risk. You falsified violations. You could have gotten someone hurt. Federal officials were at your house." She held up her hands weakly. "Please, let me explain." But explanations weren't what people wanted. They wanted accountability. She read her statement anyway, voice trembling. "I accept that I may have exercised certain responsibilities in ways that, in hindsight, were not ideal." "Not ideal," a woman shouted. "Lady, you committed a crime." Marilyn's face flushed. "That is not proven." But the stiff board member beside her suddenly stepped forward, interrupting. "It is proven," he said quietly. Gasps filled the room. He faced the crowd. "The investigators showed us the footage," he said. "We all saw it. She changed the numbers herself. She directed me to photograph them afterward. She instructed volunteers to issue fines knowing the address was wrong." He swallowed hard. "And I regret participating." The room exploded in outrage. A husband and wife shouted about their late mail. A single mother shouted about nearly losing a package of medication. A retired man accused Marilyn of threatening to fine him for a misdelivered bill she caused. The chaos rose until finally someone screamed, "Remove her!" The room went dead silent. The board exchanged looks. Then the stiff board member, voice shaking, announced, "A motion has been put forward to remove Marilyn Chapman as HOA president effective immediately." Applause, cheering, angry shouts of agreement. Someone yelled, "Vote now!" Someone else yelled, "She abused her power." Within seconds, hands shot into the air. It wasn't close. It wasn't even a contest. Almost every hand in the room was raised. When they counted the votes, Marilyn's face collapsed inward, as though her entire kingdom had turned to stone and crumbled beneath her. She was removed, stripped of title, stripped of authority, stripped of the power she had twisted into a weapon. Then someone asked the question she feared most. "Are there charges?" The stiff board member hesitated, then answered, "County investigators have forwarded their findings to the district attorney." Gasps, whispers, craning necks. Marilyn looked physically ill. People who once obeyed her now stared at her like she was a stranger. A danger. Someone who nearly harmed the entire community with her obsession with control. She opened her mouth, but no words came. She gathered her bag, her papers trembling in her hands, and hurried out of the clubhouse, head down, avoiding the stares piercing her from every angle. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. And just like that, her reign was over. The meeting dissolved into chatter, angry voices, relieved faces, neighbors swapping stories about years of quiet intimidation they had endured. Many approached me, thanking me, some even apologizing for not speaking up sooner. I nodded politely. I wasn't looking for praise. I was looking for peace. And finally, peace felt possible again. That night, I walked back home under the warm glow of the streetlights, my porch visible from halfway down the block. For the first time in weeks, my house number looked right. The original digits glinted in the light exactly as they should. 1847. My address, my home, my identity. Restored. And as I walked up the steps, one final thought crossed my mind. Some people think power comes from clipboards, fines, and fear. But real power comes from truth. And sometimes the smallest crime, a single stolen number, reveals the biggest truth of all. In the days following Maryland's removal, Pine Ridge estates changed in ways I didn't expect. Not suddenly, not loudly, but gradually, like a neighborhood finally exhaling after years of quiet tension. People walked their dogs with lighter steps. Neighbors who barely nodded before now stopped to talk, sharing stories they kept bottled up under Maryland's watch. Stories of fines issued for trivial things, threats disguised as friendly reminders, violations that seemed fabricated, a rain of paperwork and intimidation. It became clear very quickly that I wasn't the only one who had been targeted, just the one who refused to bend. 3 mornings after the vote, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I ignore those, but something nudged me to answer. On the other end was a county investigator, the same one who had stood on Maryland's porch with my file in hand. "Just calling with an update," he said. The case was reviewed by the district attorney. I leaned against my porch rail, feeling the cool morning air settle around me, and there was a short pause, the kind of pause that carried weight. "They're proceeding," he said. "Tampering with address identifiers is a misdemeanor. Combined with mail obstruction and documented intent, it escalates. The DA believes there's enough evidence to file charges." My breath moved slow, controlled. I wasn't surprised. Not really. But hearing it confirmed made the situation feel final. Real, like everything Maryland had built her authority on had snapped beneath her feet. "And the board?" I asked. "They're cooperating fully. Some admitted they were pressured. Others say they didn't understand the legal severity. Regardless, documentation is being turned over." He thanked me again, and then he said something I didn't expect. "You handled this better than most people would." Maybe I'd simply seen enough abuse of authority in my old job to recognize the signs long before most people did. When I hung up, I took a deep breath, the kind that fills your chest and empties something heavy inside you. It was over, but life didn't snap back to normal overnight. It settled, slowly, into something better. The HOA board held a special session to revise half the bylaws Maryland had enforced like scripture. They removed vague language, eliminated ambiguous fines, and rewrote entire sections that granted the president unilateral authority. For the first time in years, people attended meetings not because they feared repercussions, but because they wanted a voice. They even apologized, officially, in writing, to the entire neighborhood. The letter arrived on every doorstep, tucked neatly under doormats or clipped to mailboxes. It wasn't flowery or dramatic. It didn't try to justify or excuse. It simply stated the truth. Pine Ridge Estates acknowledges the misuse of authority by the former HOA president. We are deeply sorry for the stress, confusion, and disruption her actions caused, especially to residents directly targeted. My name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. Neighbors stopped by with baked goods, handwritten thank you notes, even offers to help fix up my garden, gestures of gratitude for standing up to something they'd grown too accustomed to tolerating. One older man from down the street, Mr. Riley, walked over one afternoon with his cane and said, "She cited me for having my porch light on during the day, said it was wasteful. She scared my wife half to death with those letters." He looked at me with a shaky but sincere smile. "Thank you for doing what the rest of us were too tired to do." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't need thanks. I didn't want it. But I nodded, shook his hand, and meant when I told him, no one should live in fear of their own community. Later that week, I received another call, this one from the Postal Authority. A follow-up. The agent confirmed that Maryland's actions constituted intentional misdelivery interference, that her deliberate changing of my address caused multiple USPS errors, one involving medical supplies for another resident. That alone was enough to add weight to the charges. I hung up the phone and stared at the house numbers on my wall. My real numbers, gleaming in the sunlight like they finally belonged again. A week later, something unexpected happened. A knock at the door. 2 knocks, soft hesitant. I opened it to find Marilyn standing there. Gone were the pastel cardigans. Gone were the crisp slacks and polished shoes. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair unstyled, her posture curled inward. She looked small. She held a stack of papers in her hands. Court documents, a citation, a summons. She clutched them like evidence of her unraveling. She swallowed. I wanted to apologize. Her voice cracked, not with guilt, with fear. Fear of consequences she never believed could touch her. I didn't mean to hurt anybody, she said, eyes glossy. I thought it would help the neighborhood. That making things uniform would make it safer, more organized, better. She shook her head. I lost perspective. I didn't respond. She looked up at me, meeting my eyes for the first time without the shield of her false authority. I know you won't forgive me. I don't expect it. I just needed to say it. For a moment, she looked like someone realizing that control is a fragile thing, a thing that can be taken away just as easily as it's abused. I nodded once, not with compassion, but with understanding. The kind of understanding you give someone who has finally seen the truth they tried so hard to avoid. She exhaled shakily, then turned, then walked away. I never saw her again. The new HOA president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Evelyn, took over shortly after. She rebuilt trust slowly, carefully. She held open forums, invited residents to rewrite policies, and insisted on transparency at every step. Things changed. Kids played in the street without parents worrying that a chalk drawing might trigger citation. People put up holiday decorations without wondering if they'd match the HOA-approved color palette. Neighbors waved at each other instead of glancing nervously at their lawns. Peace, real peace, settled over Pine Ridge estates. Weeks later, as spring returned, I installed a new set of house numbers, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Thick brush metal, solid, straight, impossible to mistake. 1847. My identity, my home, restored on my terms. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the neighborhood gold, I sat on my porch and listened to the quiet. The good quiet, the kind that settles into your bones when life finally returns to what it should be. A neighbor walking her dog paused at the sidewalk and called out, "Feels different around here now, doesn't it?" "Yeah," I said. "It does." She smiled. "You did that." I shook my head. No, the truth did. And as she walked on, I thought about something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Relief. A long, deep, earned relief. Because in the end, a house number isn't just a number. It's your home's identity, your address, your connection to the world, your place on the map. And when someone tries to steal that, when someone tries to rewrite who you are, standing up to them isn't just the right thing to do. It's necessary. Because sometimes justice doesn't start with a courtroom. Sometimes it starts with a single number on a wall and the person brave enough to put it back where it belongs.